Today, we're focusing on return to center. What does return to center mean? And I thought, well, that's a really good place to start. What does that mean? It means that sometimes it's as if we lose ourselves. We get triggered, and we often get triggered into the fight, flight, defend response, or the give up, depressed, collapsed response. Sometimes fawning comes in, but I'm not going to focus on fawning right here. So we want to come back to center. It is important for us sometimes to flee, to fight. It is sometimes important for us to give up. But we want to be able to return to center where we're calm, present, can connect with other people, connect with ourselves, even a sense of noticing ourselves and other people. In the place of center, we can feel and think at the same time. Well, it got inspired 3 years ago when I took a couple of courses based on the Polyvagal Theory. And I don't totally understand all the nuances of the research of Dr. Stephen Porges. However, I got really curious, and my curiosity led me to developing some systems that I found worked with my clients. So the Polyvagal Theory emphasizes the role of the autonomic nervous system. That is the system in our body that we don't even think about, that looks after digestion and breathing and all those automatic processes that are going on in our bodies without us typically noticing. And especially the vagus nerve, which is responsible for many aspects of us resting and digesting and good health. And it's like a bunch of little snaky streams that go from the back of our head all through our lungs, our heart, even the throat, and down stomach and the intestines. So it affects many of the major organs of our body. And we can understand how safety, co-regulation, and connection are paramount to a healthy human experience. And co-regulation means that we can come together like this. We can make connection with one another in a calm, heart-to-heart, present way. But if one of us gets triggered, we're not co-regulated. In this presentation, you will have some ideas about what to pay attention in and of yourself and with other people. Becoming a noticer, becoming an observer is very important for keeping a space between what often that trigger and our response to it, whether it's in our own behaviors or in relationship to other people. Key player in the autonomic nervous system is the prefrontal cortex, and that has been developed over the decades and centuries for us to make connection, to create safety for ourselves. And that prefrontal cortex, when we don't feel safe, either physically or emotionally, Dan Siegel calls it flipping the lid. And the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully function when we are feeling in danger. All of our systems get into sort of an alarm state triggered by the amygdala, which is like a fire alarm of our whole system. And when it gets fired, we are more interested in staying alive and taking care of ourselves. And we're not really present to other people. Imagine the fire alarm going off in your house. Now you may quickly look around for your loved ones and grab them. But if you're having a conversation with somebody, you're not going to focus on their feelings or their thoughts. You're going to focus on getting yourself safe. And the same response happens when somebody yells at us and we get triggered, or somebody starts to do something that looks like they're going to physically harm us. We have that same alarm that goes on for us that disconnects us from the relationship. So, and then return to center is bringing the prefrontal cortex back intact so that we can make connection. And here's a picture of the vagus nerve that I referred to before, and you can see how it weaves all through the major parts of our body, and it affects so much of our functioning when we don't keep what Stephen Porges calls vagal tone. We want a healthy vagal tone, and I'll discuss a little bit later what that means. But you can see that the vagus nerve affects our mood, it affects our speech, it affects even saliva. I've had clients that could hardly speak and they said their mouth was very dry. Affects our breathing when we start to have that anxiety, panic breathing, or the very deep, big, depressed sighs. Affects our blood pressure, our skin, our muscles. We can start to feel tingly. I sometimes have people that start to shiver in sessions. Affects your digestion and your elimination system. So very key to the whole polyvagal theory. And I did talk about the amygdala. It is an almond-shaped brain mass which processes fearful, threatening, and dangerous stimuli. And it affects the vagus nerve. We want that vagus nerve to be in good shape so we can properly rest and properly digest our food and think clearly. Okay, here's a little picture of the brain. And when the amygdala is triggered and is giving the message that we're in danger, and by the way, there's another part of the brain that's called the hippocampus that's also involved in all of this activation of the nervous system. So typically as humans, we do the fight, the flee, you can put in defend, you can put in collapse, hopelessness, giving up response to the survival reaction of the activated amygdala. And I'm feeling very blessed that an illustrator in Calgary called Sam Hester provided me with illustrations for the book. An emotional regulation we've already talked about, but here's a definition for you. Controlling your attention, you're able to logically assess what's going on for you, and also emotional regulation helps you with emotional regulation involves a bunch of strategies for managing the nervous system stress responses. And I hope you're not too bored with all these medical things before we get into the strategies, but we need a little bit of grounding. And this is what it's like when we can regulate ourselves, emotionally regulate. And that is to come back to center and to know that place well, to know what it feels like to be centered. And I talked a little bit about co-regulation, but it's really interesting that many people that have anger management issues, problems with depression, problems with anxiety, they often have a history of some attachment issues with their primary caregivers, because our primary caregivers when we were babies actually are teaching us to come back to center. Just imagine the baby crying and fussing and not in a content, grounded, pleasant space. And if the caregiver doesn't attend to that child regularly, we can't do it every minute, but if there's not regular, consistent care, that child doesn't learn to bring itself back to center. So we have a lot of adults on planet Earth that don't know how to come back to center. So the more people that learn to do this, the better parents they will be, and then we'll have more of a healed planet. So the process through which children develop through their caregivers the ability to soothe, and manage distressing emotions and sensations. And here I want to mention the whole field of addiction. Any process that's activity or substance that we ingest is an attempt to manage the emotions. Addiction is merely a process to try to self-soothe oneself, whether that is running, gambling, sex addiction, or the ingesting of substances, food, alcohol, and illegal drugs, right? Oh, it's important to know. But here we are with the baby in that centered state, saying, yes, I can come to calm when I'm with my caregiver, my present caregiver. And so for many adults, we are looking for a person. I usually recommend 3. Find 3 people who know how to come to center and welcome you to come to center. So here's a little exercise for you. I want you to pull out a piece of paper. If you've got a piece of paper handy, I hope you do. I'll just give you a minute here. Find a piece of paper, and we're going to explore what might be the triggers for you of when you get off center, and get pulled out of being in center. And it's important for us, for our well-being, to have a list that we know if I'm entering this space or going to have a conversation with this particular person, that I'm at risk of being triggered. So I've put a list here on the screen. It's also in the workbook of different categories of triggers. I just had a client yesterday who he had previously made his list of triggers, and then he realized that when he spends time with his mother, she drinks too much and he gets very uptight and wants to flee. And it's a trigger for him because he grew up with people drinking too much. And so we added alcohol, and he started, once we named that trigger for him, he was able to name some other people who drink too much, and decided he was going to minimize his time with those people because life's too precious to go into a state of being triggered. So I want you to take a look, and I'll give you a minute to write down specific people, animals, places, topics of discussion. Some people get triggered by politics. Okay, I hope you've got started at least a list of 3 triggers that you're aware of. And the more you start that noticing process so that you can catch and name your triggers, the better. Just noticing, when am I feeling relaxed and calm and connected, and then what happened or said or turned up and then triggered me and pulled me out of center. Very interesting that some people put dogs on their list of triggers, and most often they've had a very distressing, perhaps harmful to them, event with a dog. And then there's a number of people who put their precious dog on their list of creating emotional safety and calm. So I found that fascinating. We can have different perspectives. So the question is, with your list of triggers, how are you going to minimize and manage those triggers? I'll give you a couple of examples. So I have a trigger, even though I've had lots of therapy and I'm handling life much, much better. I don't have anger management issues anymore, which I did in my 30s. I still have an aversion to mice and rats. They pull me back to a memory that I'm not fond of in our old farmhouse and our barn that had problems with mice and rats. I just feel myself curling in. So if we find a mouse in our garage or whatever, I leave it for my husband to attend to. Thanks for sharing, Patricia. Yes, sarcastic tone. Yes, I have a slight trigger to eye rolling by my husband if he rolls his eyes when I think I'm saying something brilliant. Another one is I got abused by a nurse when I was a young girl, and I woke up at home. She just kept stabbing me, and she was getting really angry that she couldn't find a vein in my skin. And so I have strategies now to look after myself, and I don't get panicked when I think I have to go and to the lab to give blood. I have found Eduardo, and Eduardo goes slowly and he talks to me, and he knows that I could faint if he uses the wrong needle, so he always uses a butterfly needle, and I just feel so comforted by him. So I will wait an hour if he's not there doing a shift. So I'll say it's Eduardo here. So there are ways that we can take care of ourselves. The more we take care of ourselves and the less we're triggered, the healthier we are. So we're going to move on here to sources of emotional safety and comfort. So Eduardo has been a symbol of safety and comfort for me. And I just settle and I don't move out of my centered state with him, right? So I used to have to return to center after I gave blood. Or if I had somebody yell at me and tell me to F off, which sometimes happens. People get triggered, and then if they have an anger management issue, they may speak to you disrespectfully. And then I have a reaction to that. Obviously, they're dysregulated. And then I get dysregulated. We're disconnected. And one of us needs to come back to center and welcome the other back to center. So sources of emotional safety and comfort. Again, I'm going to stay quiet. And again, you're going to look at this list and think about what people, what animals, what places, topics do you love? I love discussing professional and personal development. I actually enjoy talking about trauma because I'm very excited that we have the understanding and the research that helps us calm people that have traumatic nervous systems that are living with trauma. We have better systems to help bring that event to calm, whether it's physical, sexual, verbal, emotional abuse, or any kind of abandonment or neglect. All right, let me stay quiet for a minute and allow you to take a look at this list and write down a couple of pieces for you, a couple ideas. Gardening is one for me. Thinking about my mother is another. I have 3 friends on my list that are key friends, and then a smattering of other friends that I call when I am out of center and want to return to center. These are very important strategies for returning to center. And there's a typo error on the screen. It shouldn't say fierce eyes, it should say soft eyes. I hope everybody's going, Patricia, it's okay to make mistakes, because then that creates emotional safety for me. So I'd like for you to put in an example of one of your favorite strategies to bring yourself to return to center, an emotional safety or comfort, activity or person. Just put each one of you, please, in the chat box so that we can inspire one another to consider these options. I have a friend who knits. She'll knit when she's talking. She'll knit when she's watching TV, and she says it just brings her home to have her hands doing something. So every person has to find sort of their strategy for themselves. Elaine's saying focused breathing, hugs for my husband. Oh, I know her husband Chuck, and he gives amazing hugs. Yawning. Yes, yawning actually is a good physiological process to let go. You breathe in very deeply and you breathe out. Yes. Making ribbon skirts. Yes, anything that's traditional in your traditional ritual. Rituals are very good at bringing people back to center. And then walking in nature does also calm down the nervous system and tone or strengthen the vagal nerve. And Gwendolyn says praying, beautiful. And Radis is going for a walk and breathing. Deb Dana, a social worker, has become quite the expert for resource for therapists. So she says a flexible nervous system is a resilience system. And you can see these cars down here. One is racing, and there's a time to race to get away and to be safe. Sometimes when there's a deadline, you have to move fast. But if you are always racing and your heart is racing, that's not good for your health. It's not good for your vagus nerve. And you can see the car behind has burned itself out and it's stuck. And we need to repair it and get it back on the road. So there is a time to get really discouraged and stuck and evaluate what's going on. Maybe you need to let go of a relationship, right? So there's times where you want to feel that down, stuck state and take a look at it. But ideally, we want to return or be anchored in the center of the lane of the road, going at a nice pace, right? Sometimes you need to pass a car, you got to go fast. Other times you slow down. And other times you get stuck. So I use a car as an analogy in the book, Return to Center. So the charge state is that state of anxiety, of fight, of flight, of freeze. In the stress management literature, it's called an activated sympathetic nervous state. But I just call it charge to make it simple for my clients. You can see the word sympathetic there. And these are some words that describe that state. When you're in there, you flipped your lid, and this is going on. Then we want to put a brake on it. And in the book, Return to Center, are lists of strategies to put the brake on, to slow down the speeding. We want to put the brake on and get back to the center of the lane. You can hurt yourself or others when you are in this speeding, often people are out of control. Then we have the give up state. This is where depression shows up. Loneliness, hopelessness. I have hopeless down there. You're hopeless, you're lost, you're depleted. And this is down medically in the dorsal vagal. I just wanted to make it simple for my clients so I could say, oh, you're in the give up state. Sometimes we burn out in that charge state. We use up so much energy. Whoa. And in the give up state, we are depleted. And maybe we spent too much time feeling angry. And then we end up down in the depressed state where we actually say, what is wrong with me? In the charge state, we tend to blame other people and be yelling at them or running away from them and seeing them as the problem. Where in the give up state, we tend to see ourselves as losers. And it's like this, oh, I'm stuck, I can hardly move. Even talking, clients that are in this depressed give up state, they can hardly get a word out. And then we have the centered state, which we've talked a fair bit about, and that's in the nervous system language is the ventral vagal. Ventral vagal's in good shape. Your vagus nerve is calmed, is in, sort of like in charge. So then you're calm and you're capable, you can think rationally, you're grounded, you could connect with other people. This is the job of any therapist, to stay in this state and welcome back the client when they get dysregulated, either into the charge state or the give up state. So in return to center, we have strategies to put the brake on the charge state to help come back to center. We have strategies for lifting up in the give up state and coming back to center. And then there's a whole section about how to strengthen the vagus nerve, how to strengthen your well-being, and to know what it means and feels like to be in the centered state, so that you're more quickly able to identify when you're not there. I'll give you a couple hints with the charge state, putting on that brake. Breathing works really, really well. Deep breathing. Make the out breath longer than the in breath. And the opposite is true for the give up state. Do not do deep breathing if you're depressed, because you're already probably sighing and doing deep breathing. You want to add energy. The names of those 3 people that bring you comfort, even listening to that caring voice at the end of the phone or on a Zoom session, will help lift you out of that state. Going for a walk, nature is very helpful. Nature's helpful in both the charged and the give up state. And for the centered state, everything we know about being mentally and physically healthy, right? Sleeping, eating properly, exercise, and doing something about healing our trauma, plus having some stress management techniques. So the book, Return to Center, is available at solutionsforresilience.com. I'm offering, if you want to email me and get the workbook that accompanies. I made this for therapists to do some of these exercises with their clients. And if you would like this workbook for you, for yourself, and or somebody you care about, just email me and I will send it to you. It's got the exercises in it that coordinate with the book.